The wind had a way of carrying memories across the plains like it refused to let anything truly be forgotten. It whispered through the dry grass, rattled loose boards, and slipped through cracks in places that should have long been silent. That was the first thing he noticed when he stepped out of his truck and looked up at the cabin. It wasn't just broken. It felt like it was waiting. He stood there for a long moment, hat low over his eyes, coat brushing against his legs as the wind pushed past him. The land stretched wide in every direction, rolling hills of yellow grass fading into distant mountains capped with snow. It was the kind of place a man could disappear in without anyone asking questions. Maybe that was why his brother had chosen it. Or maybe it had chosen him. He hadn't been back here in years. Not since the letter came, folded rough and stamped with a county seal. No warmth in it, no comfort. Just a few cold lines telling him his brother was gone and the property was now his. No explanation, no story. Just gone? That didn't sit right with him then. It sat even worse now. He took a few steps forward, boots crunching over gravel and brittle grass. The cabin leaned slightly to one side, like it had grown tired of standing. Half the roof had caved in and the porch sagged so low it looked ready to give up entirely. Windows were broken, some boarded up, others left open like empty eyes staring out over the land. A red arrow painted on a piece of wood caught his attention, nailed crooked above the front wall. It pointed down toward the structure itself, faded but still visible. He frowned at it. His brother hadn't been the type to leave signs like that. If anything, he'd been quiet, careful. The kind of man who kept things to himself even when he shouldn't. "Why would you mark it like that?" he muttered under his breath. The wind didn't answer, but it did seem to push a little harder, as if urging him closer. He climbed the porch slowly, testing each step before putting his full weight down. The wood groaned under him, complaining with every movement. When he reached the door, he noticed it was already slightly open. Not wide, just enough to make him pause. He hadn't been here. No one had told him anyone else had been here either. His hand rested on the door for a second. He almost turned back then. Almost decided that whatever was inside wasn't worth digging into. But something heavier than fear kept him there. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was the years he'd spent ignoring letters he never opened. Or maybe it was just the simple truth that blood doesn't let you walk away that easy. He pushed the door open. Inside, the air was stale and thick with dust. Light spilled in through broken gaps in the walls, cutting through the darkness in thin, pale beams. The place smelled like old wood and something else beneath it, something faint but sour. Not strong enough to name, but strong enough to notice. The room was bare for the most part. A table sat off to one side, one leg shorter than the others. A chair lay tipped over nearby. There were marks on the floor, long scratches like something heavy had been dragged across it. He crouched down, running his fingers lightly over them. They were recent. His chest tightened. He stood up again, eyes scanning the room more carefully now. There were small things he hadn't noticed at first. A lantern in the corner, a stack of papers near the wall, and then, near the center of the room, something that didn't belong at all. The floorboards looked different. Not new exactly, but disturbed. The wood there didn't match the rest. It had been lifted and put back. Not perfectly either. There were gaps along the edges, thin but visible if you knew to look. He stepped closer, slow and cautious. "Brother," he said quietly, almost like he expected an answer this time. "What were you into out here?" No reply came. Just the wind again, slipping through the broken parts of the cabin, brushing against his back like a warning. He knelt down and pressed his hand against one of the boards. It shifted slightly under his weight. Not much, but enough. That was when he noticed something else. A shovel leaned against the far wall, half hidden in shadow. It wasn't rusted over like everything else. The handle was worn, but it had been used not long ago. Dirt still clung to the blade. His stomach sank. Whatever this was, it hadn't ended when his brother died. He stood up slowly, eyes moving between the shovel and the floor. Every instinct told him to walk away, to leave the cabin as it was and forget he ever came back. But the longer he stood there, the more that feeling twisted inside him. The kind that doesn't let you sleep. The kind that follows you no matter how far you go. He walked over and picked up the shovel. It felt heavier than it should have. When he turned back to the floor, the cabin seemed quieter somehow. Even the wind had pulled back, like it didn't want to be part of what came next. He slid the edge of the shovel into the gap between the boards and pushed down. The wood resisted at first, creaking in protest. Then, with a sharp crack, one of the boards lifted slightly. He froze. For a moment he thought he heard something from below. Not a sound exactly, more like a shift. A movement where there shouldn't have been any. He held his breath and listened. Nothing, just silence again. He told himself it was the wood settling. Old cabins did that. They made noise. They always had. Still, his hands tightened around the shovel. He pried the board up a little more this time, enough to get his fingers under it. The wood splintered slightly as he pulled, but it gave way. Slowly, piece by piece, he began to lift it free. Dust fell into the darkness beneath, and then he saw it. Not clearly, not all at once. Just enough to make his blood run cold. Something was down there. Not just dirt. Not just empty space. Something his brother had buried. And whatever it was, it didn't feel like it had been meant to stay hidden forever. He leaned closer, trying to see more into the shadow beneath the cabin floor, his heart beating louder with each passing second. That was when the ground below shifted again. This time, there was no mistaking it. He jerked back so fast the board slipped from his hands and hit the floor with a dull crack. For a second, he just stood there, staring at the opening like it might look back at him. His breath came uneven, chest rising and falling as he tried to make sense of what he had felt. It had not been imagination. The ground under that cabin had moved. He swallowed hard and forced himself to step forward again. "Just dirt," he said under his breath, though the words didn't carry much weight. Just loose dirt shifting, but his voice didn't sound convinced, even to him. He bent down slower this time, careful, watching the dark space beneath the floor as if expecting it to answer him. The light from the broken walls barely reached inside, leaving most of it swallowed in shadow. He grabbed the edge of the board again and pulled it aside, setting it down more gently now. The hole was big enough for him to see a patch of ground below. It wasn't deep, not like a well or a tunnel. More like a shallow crawlspace, though it looked uneven, dug out by hand rather than built. The dirt wasn't packed either. It was loose, freshly turned at some point, though now it had begun to dry and settle, and then he saw it again. Not movement this time, but shape. Something long lay beneath the surface, just slightly raised where the dirt covered it. A line that didn't belong in natural ground. It ran from one side of the opening to the other, uneven but clear once you noticed it. His throat went dry. "Brother," he said again, softer now, like speaking too loud might wake something. "What did you do out here?" He leaned in closer, squinting to make out more. The shape wasn't straight like a beam. It curved slightly. And there were smaller shapes near it, clustered together in a way that made his chest tighten without knowing why. He reached for the shovel again. Every part of him wanted to stop. To cover the whole back up and leave. Drive away and never come back to this place. But he had already crossed that line the moment he lifted the first board. Whatever was down there had already found its way into his mind. He lowered the shovel carefully into the opening and pressed it into the dirt. The ground gave easily, like it had been turned over not long ago. He scooped out a small amount and lifted it up, setting it aside on the floor, then another. Each movement felt heavier than the last, like he was digging into something he shouldn't be touching. The smell came next. It wasn't strong at first. Just a faint scent rising from the disturbed earth. Old, damp, mixed with something else that made him pause. It wasn't rot exactly, but it carried a weight to it, something that didn't belong in clean soil. He stopped digging and sat back on his heels. Memories started to surface then, uninvited and sharp. The last time he had seen his brother wasn't here. It had been years ago, back when the land was still just talk between them. A dream, more than anything. His brother had always been drawn to quiet places, to land where no one else wanted to stay. Said it gave a man space to think. But near the end, those letters had changed. He hadn't opened them at the time. Not until after the notice came. When he finally read through them, one by one, he realized they hadn't been the same simple words he remembered. There had been something off about them, shorter sentences. Less detail, and certain lines that stuck in his mind now. "Ground ain't right here. I hear things when the wind stops. Been digging." Needed to see for myself. He had brushed it off back then. Told himself his brother had just been alone too long. That isolation did strange things to a man. Now, standing in that cabin, those words felt different. He looked back down at the hole. "You were digging for a reason," he said quietly. "Not just to pass time." The shovel felt cold in his hands as he picked it up again. This time, he dug deeper. Each scoop revealed more of that uneven shape beneath the dirt. The curve became clearer, more defined. And those smaller shapes near it started to stand out too, clustered in a pattern that made his stomach twist. He stopped again, breathing heavier now. His mind was trying to put it together, but he didn't want it to. Instead, he reached down with his hand and brushed away some of the loose dirt carefully, slower than before. His fingers trembled slightly as they moved across the surface. What he uncovered next made him pull his hand back like he'd been burned. It wasn't just dirt. Something solid lay beneath. Something pale against the dark ground. He stared at it, his thoughts racing. "No," he whispered. "No, that ain't right." He leaned in again, closer this time, and wiped away more dirt. The shape became clearer. Smooth in some places, rough in others. His chest tightened. He shook his head, stepping back slightly, but his eyes stayed locked on it. "There's no way," he muttered, but deep down he knew there was. The silence in the cabin pressed in around him. Even the wind had gone still again, leaving the space feeling closed in, heavy. He forced himself to look around the room, as if searching for something to ground himself. That was when his eyes landed on the stack of papers near the wall. He hadn't checked them yet. He stood up slowly, brushing dirt from his hands onto his coat, though it didn't come off easily. Then he walked over and picked up the papers. They were worn, edges curled, some of them stained. He flipped through them quickly at first, then slowed down as he started to read. They were notes, not letters this time. Rough handwriting, uneven, like they had been written in a hurry or in low light. Dates were scattered across the pages, not in order. "I thought it was just animals, something under the cabin." Digging made it worse. He turned to another page. "It moves when I stop." His grip tightened on the paper. A cold feeling spread through him, settling deep in his chest. "This ain't right," he said again, louder now, like saying it might change something. He flipped to another page. "Can't leave it." "Not now. I covered it, but it ain't done." The last line on that page was written darker than the others, like the pen had been pressed harder. "If you're reading this, don't dig." He froze. The words sat there in his hands, heavy and clear. Slowly, he lowered the paper and turned his head back toward the hole in the floor. For a moment, he didn't move. Then, against every warning, every bit of sense left in him, he walked back toward it. The shovel was still lying where he had left it. The hole looked darker now, deeper somehow, even though he hadn't dug that much. He crouched down again, his heartbeat loud in his ears. "I should stop," he said quietly. But he didn't. Instead, he reached for the shovel once more. And as he pushed it back into the earth, the ground beneath shifted again. Only this time, it didn't feel like loose dirt settling. It felt like something responding. The shovel hit something firm this time. It wasn't the soft give of dirt or the scrape of loose stones. It was solid, steady, like the ground itself had pushed back. The force ran up his arms and made him stop mid-motion. He held the handle tight, staring down into the opening. For a few seconds, nothing moved. Then the soil along the edges shifted again, just slightly, like something underneath had turned or adjusted. Not enough to break through, just enough to remind him it was still there. He pulled the shovel out slowly and set it aside. "This isn't right," he said, his voice low but steady now. Fear was still there, but something else had taken hold with it. A kind of stubborn pull. The same thing that had probably kept his brother here long after he should have left. He reached down again, this time using his hands. The dirt felt colder the deeper he went. Not damp, not wet, just colder than it should have been under a sunlit cabin. His fingers moved carefully, brushing away soil inch by inch. He didn't rush now. Whatever this was, rushing didn't feel wise. The shape beneath the ground became clearer. Not just one long form, but layers, overlapping pieces. Some smooth, some jagged, they weren't arranged neatly. They looked placed, not grown or formed naturally. His breathing slowed as his mind tried to make sense of it. It wasn't just something buried, it had been arranged. A memory hit him then, sharp and unexpected. When they were younger, his brother used to stack things in careful ways. Stones, wood, anything he could find. Said it helped him think. Said patterns meant something if you looked long enough. Back then, it had seemed harmless. Standing over that hole, it didn't feel harmless anymore. You were trying to build something, he muttered. Or hide it. He brushed away more dirt, revealing a clearer section of the buried shapes. One piece stood out from the rest. It was smoother than the others, almost worn down. It curved in a way that felt too deliberate. He didn't want to touch it, but he did. The moment his fingers made contact, a faint vibration ran through the ground. Not strong, not violent, but steady enough that he felt it in his palm, like a pulse, slow and uneven. He jerked his hand back and sat up quickly. The cabin creaked around him in response, or maybe it had already been creaking and he just noticed now. The boards above groaned softly, and a loose plank on the wall shifted with a dry snap. He looked around, suddenly aware of how alone he was out here, miles from anything. No neighbors, no road traffic. Just wind and land in this cabin, and whatever was under it. He stood up and took a step back, running a hand over his face. His thoughts were starting to crowd in, overlapping and restless. Think, he said to himself. You need to think straight. He forced his attention back to the notes he had found. They were still lying near the wall, scattered where he had dropped them. He walked over and picked them up again, flipping through more carefully this time. Some pages were just scribbles. Others had short lines that didn't seem to connect at first. Not alone out here. It follows the digging. Gets closer when it's quiet. He paused on that last one. Gets closer. He glanced back toward the hole. A chill moved through him, slow and deliberate. Closer to what? He said quietly. Another page caught his eye. This one was different. The writing was steadier, like it had been done earlier than the others. I thought it was something buried, something old. But it ain't dead. He read that line twice, then again. His jaw tightened. You're saying this thing is alive, he said, almost like he was answering his brother across time. The idea should have sounded ridiculous. Out here, under a broken cabin, something alive beneath the ground. But nothing about this place felt normal anymore. Not the shifting dirt, not the cold, not the way the air seemed to press in when he got too close to that hole. He folded the papers slowly and set them back down. His eyes moved to the door. He could leave, right now. Walk out, get in his truck, and drive until this place was nothing but a bad memory behind him. No one would blame him. No one would even know. But the thought didn't sit right. Not with the notes he had read. Not with the way his brother's words had changed near the end. There had been fear in those lines, yes. But also something else. Determination, like he had been trying to understand it. Or stop it. You didn't run, he said under his breath. So why should I? The moment the words left his mouth, the floor behind him shifted again. This time louder. A dull thump echoed up from beneath the boards, followed by a faint scrape that sent a sharp tension through his shoulders. He turned slowly. The opening in the floor looked the same at first glance, but something had changed. The dirt inside had shifted to one side, just slightly, exposing more of what lay beneath. That smooth, curved piece he had touched earlier was more visible now, and it looked closer to the surface. He felt his pulse quicken. That's not possible, he said. He hadn't dug that much. He hadn't uncovered enough for it to move like that, unless it wasn't just sitting there, unless it had moved on its own. A sound drifted up from below then, soft, barely there, like something brushing against the underside of the earth. He took another step back, his boots scraping against the wooden floor. This ain't real, he said, but his voice didn't carry any belief. The air in the cabin felt heavier now, harder to breathe. Even the light coming through the broken walls seemed dimmer, like something was dulling it. He reached for the shovel again, gripping it tighter this time. If it's moving, he said, then it can be uncovered. The logic didn't make much sense, but it was enough to push him forward. He stepped back to the hole and began digging again, faster now. The dirt came loose easily, falling away in clumps. With each scoop, more of the buried shape was revealed. The curved piece extended further than he had thought, connecting to other forms beneath it. It wasn't random. It was connected. All of it. His hands started to shake as the pattern became clearer. "Brother," he said, his voice tight. "What did you wake up?" Another thump came from below, closer this time. The shovel slipped in his grip for a second, but he held on. He leaned in, pushing aside more dirt with his hands. The opening was wider now, deep enough that he could see more clearly into the space beneath. And what he saw made him stop completely. The shapes weren't just buried. They were arranged in a way that pointed upward, toward him, like whatever lay beneath had been reaching or preparing to. He froze, every instinct screaming at him to step away. But he couldn't, not now. Not when he was this close to understanding. Another faint movement came from below, slow, deliberate, and this time he didn't just feel it through the ground. He heard it. A low, shifting sound like something adjusting itself after a long time of being still. His grip tightened on the shovel as he leaned closer, eyes locked on the dark space beneath the cabin. And for the first time since he arrived, a single thought pushed through everything else. This wasn't something his brother had found. It was something his brother had been trying to keep buried. He didn't move for a long moment. The shovel stayed frozen in his hands, the edge pressed into loose soil while his eyes stayed fixed on the dark space below. That quiet sound continued, faint but steady, like something adjusting itself with slow patience. His chest felt tight, but not from panic alone. There was something else building under it. A strange sense that this had been waiting for him as much as it had waited for his brother. "You tried to stop it," he said quietly, almost like he could still be heard. "You didn't run because you thought you could handle it." The thought settled heavy in his mind. Maybe his brother had not been reckless. Maybe he had been desperate. Another shift came from below, a little stronger this time. The dirt near the edge of the opening slid inward, exposing more of the buried structure. That smooth, curved piece now stood out clearly, connected to others in a pattern that made less and less sense the longer he stared at it. It wasn't just something buried. It was something built, or grown. He stepped back again, shaking his head slowly. "No," he said under his breath. "Things don't grow like this under a cabin." But deep down, he knew he was past the point of simple explanations. His eyes drifted back to the notes scattered across the floor. One line returned to him, stronger now than before. "It follows the digging." He looked back at the hole. "You got worse the more you disturbed it," he said, piecing it together. "That's why you covered it again." His grip tightened on the shovel. "And I'm doing the same thing." The cabin creaked softly around him, the sound stretching out in the silence like a warning. Outside, the wind picked up again, brushing against the broken walls, slipping through cracks and broken boards. It carried a low hum with it now, something that didn't feel natural. He moved toward the door without fully deciding to. His feet just carried him, step by step, until he stood on the edge of the sagging porch again. The open land stretched out in front of him, wide and empty. For a second, he let himself breathe. The air outside felt lighter, easier. The mountains in the distance stood calm and unmoving, like they had seen all of this before and chosen not to care. "This land ain't new," he said quietly. "Something was here before you ever came, before either of them." That thought settled into place, bringing with it a new kind of weight. Maybe his brother had not discovered anything. Maybe he had uncovered something that had always been there. The wind shifted direction suddenly, pushing against his back, urging him forward again. It carried a faint sound from inside the cabin, not loud, not sharp. Just enough to pull his attention back. He turned slowly. The door, which he had left open, now swung slightly inward on its own. And from inside that same low sound rose again, closer, more present. His jaw tightened. "Running now won't fix anything," he said to himself. Because whatever was under that cabin, it was no longer staying quiet. He stepped back inside. The air felt different immediately, thicker than before. Heavy in a way that made every breath feel like it took more effort. The light had shifted, too. Shadows stretched longer across the floor, pooling around the opening like they were drawn to it. The hole was wider now. He hadn't touched it since stepping out, but the dirt had collapsed further inward, exposing more of what lay beneath. The shapes were clearer, more defined, and unmistakably closer to the surface. A slow unease crawled up his spine. "It's moving on its own," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Another sound followed, this one sharper. A faint crack from below, like something pressing upward against the packed earth. His heart started to pound again, harder now. "You were right to be afraid," he said, thinking of his brother. "But you stayed anyway." He looked down at the shovel still in his hands, then back at the hole. "If you stayed," he said, "there had to be a reason." His eyes moved across the cabin, searching again for anything he might have missed. That was when he noticed something new. Near the far corner of the room, half hidden under fallen boards, was a small wooden box. He didn't remember seeing it before. He walked over carefully, every step measured, listening to the sounds behind him as much as watching where he was going. The floor creaked under his weight, but nothing gave way. He knelt down and pulled the box free. It was worn, edges chipped, but still intact. The lid wasn't locked, just resting in place. He hesitated for a second, then opened it. Inside were more papers, but these were different, cleaner, folded with care. A small photograph rested on top. He picked it up. It showed the cabin as it had once been, whole, standing straight. And in front of it, two figures, him and his brother, a long time ago. His chest tightened as he stared at it. "You believed this place could be something good," he said softly. "We both did." He set the photo aside and unfolded one of the papers beneath it. The writing was clearer here, steadier than the notes scattered on the floor. "I found it while digging the foundation deeper. Thought it was just rock at first." He turned to the next page. "It reacts to sound, to movement. Like it knows when it's disturbed." Another page. "I tried covering it back up. It slowed down, but it didn't stop." His hands tightened slightly. "What were you trying to do?" he murmured. He flipped to the last page. This one was shorter. "If I can't stop it, I can at least keep it from coming up." His breath caught. He lowered the paper slowly. "You stayed to hold it down," he said. The realization hit him fully now. His brother had not been digging out of curiosity. He had been trying to contain it. Another loud crack came from behind him. He turned sharply. The ground inside the hole pushed upward this time, dirt rising slightly before settling back. Not a collapse, a push. His grip on the box tightened. "It's getting stronger," he said. The timing felt too exact to ignore. Digging had made it worse. Leaving it alone had slowed it. And now, after all these years, something had changed. Maybe it had been waiting. Or maybe it had just needed someone to come back. His eyes moved between the hole and the notes in his hand. "You didn't finish it," he said quietly. "You couldn't." The cabin creaked again, louder now, as if responding to the pressure from below. Dust drifted down from the beams overhead, catching the dim light as it fell. Another push came from beneath the ground, stronger. The dirt shifted again, exposing even more of the structure below. The curved shapes now formed a clearer pattern, rising toward the opening like something trying to surface. His pulse raced. "If it reacts to movement," he said, thinking out loud, "then maybe it reacts to more than that." He looked at the lantern in the corner. Then at the broken walls, the open spaces where wind slipped through, then back at the hole. A thought formed slowly, uncertain, but enough to hold on to. "You tried to bury it," he said. But maybe that wasn't enough. Another deep shift came from below, shaking the loose boards around the opening. This time he didn't step back. He stood his ground, eyes locked on the rising shapes beneath the earth. The air in the cabin seemed to tighten around him, like the space itself was holding its breath. And for the first time, he didn't feel like he was just uncovering something. He felt like he was standing in its way. Whatever lay beneath that broken cabin was no longer waiting quietly. It was pushing upward. And it was close. He stood there, steadying his breath as the ground pushed upward again. The movement was stronger now, not violent, but certain. Like whatever was below had decided it was time. His brother's words echoed in his mind. "If I can't stop it, I can at least keep it from coming up." "You held it down," he said quietly. "That's what all this was about?" His eyes moved across the cabin again, this time not in fear, but searching for understanding. The notes, the digging, the boards placed back over the hole. It had never been about uncovering something hidden. It had been about holding something back. Another push came from below, lifting the dirt slightly before it settled again. He tightened his grip on the shovel, then slowly lowered it to the floor. "No," he said. "Digging isn't the answer." He stepped back from the opening, forcing himself to think clearly despite the pressure building in the room. The air felt heavier with every passing second, but his mind started to settle into place. It reacts to movement, to disturbance. He looked at the lantern again. And maybe to quiet. The idea felt strange, but so did everything else about this place. His brother had said it slowed when it was covered, when it was left alone. Maybe it didn't need to be destroyed. Maybe it needed to be kept still. Another low sound rose from beneath the cabin, deeper this time, like something pressing closer than before. He moved quickly now. The loose boards he had pulled up were still scattered nearby. He grabbed one and dragged it back over the opening, placing it carefully across the gap. The wood creaked under his hands as he adjusted it into place. The ground beneath shifted again, pushing upward against the board. He froze, holding it down with both hands. "Easy," he said under his breath. "Just stay down." The pressure held for a second, then eased, not gone but less. His eyes widened slightly. "That's it," he said. "That's what you figured out." He grabbed another board and laid it across the first, covering more of the opening, then another. Each piece went down with care, his movement slower now, more deliberate. With each board placed, the movement below softened. The sounds grew quieter, the air in the cabin began to ease, just a little. He kept going. Board by board, he rebuilt the broken floor, covering the hole as completely as he could. Dirt shifted beneath the wood now and then, but it didn't push as hard as before. It felt like resistance fading, or maybe settling. When the last board was in place, he sat back on his heels, breathing hard. The cabin was quiet again. Not completely silent. The wind still moved outside, brushing against the walls. The wood still creaked here and there. But the deep, unnatural sounds from below had stopped. He waited. 1 minute, then another. Nothing pushed upward. Nothing shifted. The ground held still. He let out a long breath he hadn't realized he was holding. It just needed to stay buried, he said. His brother had known? Maybe not at first. Maybe it had taken time, trial and error, fear and long nights alone. But he had figured it out. He hadn't been digging to uncover something. He had been trying to understand how to keep it contained. His gaze drifted to the small wooden box again, then to the photograph resting beside it. 2 brothers standing in front of a cabin that had once been whole. A plan that had once been simple. "This wasn't supposed to be like this," he said quietly. But life rarely followed plans. He stood up slowly, brushing dirt from his hands again. This time it didn't feel as heavy. He walked over to the walls and looked at the broken sections, the gaps where wind slipped through. If the place stayed like this, the boards would shift again. The ground would be exposed. "That's not happening," he said firmly. He stepped outside once more, scanning the land around him. There was plenty of wood nearby, fallen branches. Old fence posts, enough to patch things up, at least for now. The work would take time, days, maybe longer. But he wasn't thinking about leaving anymore. Not yet. He went to his truck and pulled out what tools he had brought. Basic things. A hammer, nails, nothing fancy but enough to start. As he walked back toward the cabin, the wind moved across the plains again, softer this time. It didn't feel like a warning anymore. It felt calm. Inside, the boards over the hole remained still. He set to work. Hours passed without him noticing. He reinforced the floor first, making sure the boards stayed tight and secure. Then he moved to the walls, covering gaps, strengthening weak spots. Every now and then, he would pause and listen, but nothing came from below. No movement, no sound. Just stillness. By the time the sun began to dip toward the horizon, the cabin looked different. Not new, not perfect, but stronger than before, held together. He stepped back and looked at it, wiping sweat from his brow. "You'd probably say I did it wrong," he said with a faint smile. "You always had a better way with this stuff." The words hung in the air for a moment, then drifted away. He walked back inside one last time before dark. The floor held firm beneath his boots. The spot where the hole had been was now covered completely, the boards tight and steady. He stood over it, quiet. "I get it now," he said softly. "You stayed because someone had to." He looked around the cabin again, taking in the worn walls, the patched sections, the quiet space that no longer felt as heavy. "I'll take it from here." For a moment, nothing happened. Then the wind outside shifted gently, brushing against the cabin like a passing hand. He nodded once, as if that was answer enough. That night he stayed. He lit the lantern and sat near the wall, listening as darkness settled over the land. The mountains faded into shadow, and the sky filled with stars. The cabin creaked now and then, but it felt normal again, grounded, at peace. And beneath it, whatever had once pushed and stirred remained still. Days later he would write his own notes. Clear ones, careful ones, not filled with fear, but with understanding. About the land, about what lay beneath it, and about what needed to be done to keep things the way they should be. He didn't plan on leaving any time soon. Some places weren't meant to be abandoned. Some things needed watching. As the fire in the lantern flickered softly, he leaned back against the wall and closed his eyes for a moment. For the first time since arriving, the weight on his chest felt lighter. Not gone, but manageable. Outside, the wind carried on across the plains, no longer whispering warnings. Just moving forward like it always had. And inside that old American cabin, patched together by two brothers in different times, the ground stayed quiet.